Hello, Lemonsterites. It is your state representative, Natalie Higgins, coming to you for the May episode of Representing Leominster. Still filming from my home office, but hoping to see the Leominster Access TV show folks soon. I miss them, and they definitely make me look a lot better than this awful background. Rim Raider's not going to give me any good ratings, but I'm really excited to be joined by Representative John Zlotnik, who is, despite being the youngest member of our delegation, the dean of our delegation. And are you in your fifth or sixth term?
Fifth term.
Fifth term. So tell us a little bit about your district, and I would love to talk about, we've been talking with other colleagues from the delegation, especially the new ones. We had them on early. Kind of how's it going in the new session?
So I represent, my district is the second Worcester district, even though I'm nowhere near the city of Worcester. But I represent the city of Gardner and the towns of Winchendon, Ashburnham, and the northern half of Westminster, which I share with Representative Kim Ferguson, who's out of Holden.
Awesome.
And the new term is, as you know, off to a bit slower start than usual because of COVID, not just because of COVID and some of the logistical hurdles that's presented, but also some of the legislation that's come up that has to sort of get dealt with differently or out of turn because of COVID. Some of the things that we've had to address that's a bit different than how we'd normally start a typical legislative session. So that's been, on one hand, challenging, but I also think it's presented us with some opportunities.
And something that we've talked about before, we had a unique situation where in our 2-year legislative cycle, it usually wraps in July of the second year. But this one butted right up against the start of our session and went until 4:30 in the morning, the day of our new session starting, which presented challenges for the clerk's office and House Counsel of trying to wrap up the work from the previous session and get ready for the kind of onslaught of all of the new bills coming in this session.
Yeah, and that's a really unique thing. It's something that doesn't really get talked about a whole lot, but there are normally, we sort of collectively refer to them as the lame duck rules that go into effect, sort of the time before and after the election. But obviously with the sort of crisis that we're still in the middle of, that wasn't really feasible. There had to be a lot more work that continued to need to be done. The budget, other COVID related things. And actually, I think it's important to note that the rules were suspended unanimously. Every Republican and every Democrat was able to come together and you figure out a structure by which to continue that work that needed to be done. But you're right, they can really continue. Literally hours before we were sworn in again, we were taking votes on finishing up legislation from the previous session, which at least certainly in my time, that's never happened before. And I think you'd have to go back many decades to find a situation like that.
Yeah, I don't think I've talked to a legislator who has experienced kind of a transition from one legislative session to another like that, that's still in the legislature. And so with 6,300 new bills being filed, we're getting going. One of the things that I'm really thankful for is being a part of the North Central Mass delegation. We're strong and tight-knit in a way that I don't think exists in every other regional delegation. But it's also a necessity, right? When you think of how many people are in the Boston delegation versus how many people are in the North Central delegation, 9, including our senator, we really need to band together for a lot of issues to make sure that our voices are stronger.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And I think that we're lucky that we've been able to sort of maintain this really, really tight-knit group. There's a lot of collegiality, there's a lot of collaboration. And I think that, and it's not just the Democrats. Kim Ferguson and Sheila Harrington have been great to work with over the years, and even the House's only independent, who's just west of me, Susanna Whips. We've always found ways to work together, to collaborate, keep good lines of communication going. And to your point, you're absolutely right. I always tell people that the city of Lowell, which is just a ways east of here, has 3 votes in the House. And a vote in the Senate, basically just to themselves, where us, the Tri-City delegation,
Hmm.
we have to spread that over all of us, and then the various towns too.
Right.
So we have our work cut out for us just because we're not as densely populated, um, compared to certainly the bigger metropolitan areas in the 128 East area.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of competition for us, and I think it's worked to our benefit that we've been able to be so tight knit over the years, going back. I mean, really, the entire time I've been in the House,
Hmm.
that's been the case, and I really think it helps this region.
Yeah, no, it's been great. And especially with three brand new legislators coming into the delegation and Dan Sena kind of coming in on a special in the middle of COVID, right? We've seen a lot of turnover in our
Yeah,
delegation, which is why I thought you had more than 5 terms under your belt,
yeah,
because there really has been a change in the region. Um,
yeah. It's a very we went from a very senior delegation to a very new delegation, and quite frankly, also a very young delegation very quickly. When I came in, my district was split between Steve Brewer, who had obviously been in office for a long time, and Jen Flanagan, who was in office for quite some time as well. And then at the other end of the district, sort of anchoring the delegation, was Hank Naughton, who
mhm.
had been in for since the Clinton administration.
Mhm.
So there had been a lot of years in and a lot of seniority, but then very sort of in rapid succession, we had quite a bit of turnover, mostly through retirements,
Mhm.
um, or in Senator Flanagan's case, being appointed to a different office, and that's I think certainly changed the face of the delegation very quickly, and I think in a way that's very uncommon for um, most delegations.
Yeah, I'm really proud of the region. Being a millennial, right? You're a fellow
Yeah.
millennial. We have a really young delegation with a lot of fresh ideas and I think a lot of energy. And we need a diversity of voices, right? But
Mhm.
I am excited about the opportunities that we have collaborating, and the political diversity, right? Being able
Mhm.
to find commonality with Rep Ferguson and Rep Harrington and Rep Whips, and really making sure that the issues that we're banding together and fighting for, we show that, are really popular across the state, across demographics. And I
Yeah.
think we have a unique voice to bring to the table.
Yeah, and I think you'll agree that I think it actually helps us, because we work so closely with members of different parties, sort of in our region all the time. I think it helps us sort of naturally work towards those compromises, which I mean I also think is a hallmark of the Massachusetts House of
Mhm.
Representatives. I always point out to people that so we just wrapped my ninth budget, and um, most of the budgets that I've been a part of have passed unanimously
Mhm.
or very, very close to unanimously. I think there was one that was a party line vote, but the rest were unanimous or maybe one no vote. And even if you break down this last budget debate we just went through, not only did the final budget pass unanimously, but every single section passed unanimously, except there was one no vote on a single section. So I think that really speaks volumes to the amount of compromise that's possible, to the amount of collaboration that's possible. And I always point that out because I think it's a good contrast to draw between what happens in other
Mhm.
states and certainly what happens at the national level, who
Mhm.
haven't had a budget since the 90s, let alone a unanimous one.
Right.
And I think it shows that it really is possible if you have people who prioritize that sort of thing. And to your point earlier, we do have it doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have a diversity of ideas. I think we do. I mean, we have
Mhm.
whether it's in this delegation or in the whole House, we have reps that really span the political spectrum. But at the end of the day, more often than not, we're able to come together and find solutions that work for everybody.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so you talked a little bit about the budget, which is our second budget during COVID, but this one looked a little more traditional just in terms of timeline.
Hmm.
Anything that you think are opportunities that are coming up out of doing the budget in the way that we've had to do it remotely that maybe hopefully will stick around? I do just want to note, like, really thankful. There was a legislative issue around sexual assault evidence kits, and whether or not we should test a backlog of 6,300 kits, and the House prioritized making sure that we reappropriated that money and that those survivors' evidence needed to be treated seriously and be fully tested. And that was something that I was prepared to work on through the legislative process, but because it had been a budget issue in the 2019 supplemental budget, we ended up taking it up in the budget. And I'm hopeful the Senate's going to be taking up the budget next week, that they will do the same, follow our lead, and we can finally put this issue to rest.
Yes, after thinking that we had put it to
Right.
rest, I hope that now this will finally stick, and we'll get
Hmm.
we'll get the resolution that we're looking for. But you sort of asked about the pros and cons of the current situation, and I think that I'll start with, I think one drawback is that, and I don't know if you've had the same experience, but the previous class, the class that was first elected in 2018, and now the class that was elected in 2020, a lot of them I haven't really met face to face yet.
Hmm.
And normally, sort of in the hours that we spend between votes, or even just a bit of time, people wander around the chamber, you talk to people, and I think that actually helps lead to some of that compromise that we talked about before, because when you can have a normal conversation with someone, and it's not, you're not under the spotlight, you can sort of just get to know each other and get to know each other's districts and each other's priorities and sort of
Hmm.
positions. I think that really helps. And that's something that obviously none of us have really been able to do. One I think pro, though, for us out here, is that I find myself able to attend a lot more things because they're
Hmm.
virtual. Normally, and it's a little bit different for you, only having the city of Leominster.
Right.
But if I had, let's say, I had an event in Westminster that I needed to attend, and then something in Winchendon the same day, well, that means I'm going to probably spend at least a half an hour getting between those
Hmm.
events, and then probably another half an hour getting back to my office or my home. So it's like that's an hour that's gone. And then the other thing is, and then forget about Boston. I mean,
Hmm.
like before COVID, I mean, sometimes it would take me 2 hours to get into Boston, which basically meant that if I had to go to Boston, that was the only thing I could do that
Hmm.
day. So I had to really prioritize what I would go to, and how I would sort of make my schedule work. And the one thing about this is, whether it's a briefing or committee briefing, or any other sort of meeting or briefing that would
Hmm.
normally take place in Boston, but it's now being held virtually, I find myself able to attend a lot more of those. And I think that's a real benefit for those of us who live further away, and represent districts that are further away from the city. That I think we're able to fit a lot more of those things in because of the virtual nature of almost everything we're doing.
I'm hoping that we're going to keep some sort of hybrid nature of this, because I have noticed attendance
Mm.
is just through the roof at so many different things, because
Oh yeah.
logistically you can figure out how to get to more things more
Well,
quickly.
it's so simple. I mean, I'm sure you've seen this too. Um, like you'll see colleagues just, on their phones, like zooming into something while they're in the parking lot waiting to go to something else.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's something that really wasn't an option ever before this.
Hmm.
So I agree. I hope that, obviously, I think we're all looking to return to, face to face and in person, with great eagerness. But I'm hoping that we can still accommodate that, because I think it really does facilitate a much greater level of participation, because it's just easier for people to factor it into their schedules.
Yeah. No, I think that that's really important. And so you're heading into your fifth term, and you've been named a vice chair of a brand new committee. Can you talk a little bit about what that's been like?
Sure. So at the beginning of this term, I was named vice chair of the committee on building security, infrastructure, and operations, which, as you noted, is a new committee,
Hmm.
but it does sort of touch on some work that was being done by former committees. So actually, one of the areas that is a real big concern for this new committee is cybersecurity.
Mm.
And a previous committee I was on was actually sort of the one that was designated to handle those issues. The Committee on Governmental Affairs and Technology. And one, cybersecurity is a constant issue everywhere, as we've learned in this last week with how fragile some of our supply networks and systems can be
Hmm.
under bad circumstances with bad actors. And then the State House is no exception. The State House is routinely attacked in a cyber way. There's constantly, sort of phishing attacks. malware, even just all kinds of things, quite frankly, that
Hmm.
I don't have the technical expertise to fully understand. But it's a fairly routine thing that our IT department and our cybersecurity team is sort of working fairly constantly to keep to keep the building's operations and systems safe and secure. And obviously the information and the records that are kept are obviously vital. And so it's a very important thing. Um, and then the other thing is just physical security. I think I've only been around obviously after 9/11, but
Hmm.
before 9/11, not only could you walk into the building through any number of the dozen doors that exist, but you could also drive under the building. And that was only reevaluated as recently as after 2001. And then there was a little bit more of a look after the marathon bombing. But that's sort of constantly an issue too that we need to reevaluate. One of the I think one of the really special things about the Boston, about Beacon Hill and the State House here in Massachusetts, is that it is so close to everything else.
Hmm.
It's not like if you go down to Washington, on most circumstances, you're a mile from things or 100 yards and there's a fence, right? Um, you can walk right up to the State House because it's right in the middle of the city. In the city and the State House have sort of grown up around each other.
Hmm.
What used to be sort of fields around the building is now more building that's part of the State House with the additions. And then Beacon Hill, the neighborhood around the State House, has also grown up pretty densely around it as well. Which we see this become an issue whenever there's a demonstration, which
Hmm.
quite often there are. There's really not any place for people to go, and because we don't have, excluding the Boston Commons, which is sort of a bit away, but it's not like most state houses where there's sort of an open field that's
Hmm.
surrounding it. A few years ago, I was in Wisconsin and I went to the State House in Madison, and comparing and contrasting that to ours, it's night and day. They set aside a very large space for their building, and so the city, which is still all around it, is still quite a bit back. There's plenty of space to do certain things, and that also changes the security picture as well. And I think another thing that we're hoping to take a look at, or certainly I am, is the sort of flow of people in and out of the building. I'm sure you've experienced this on days with a big event in the State House. People can wait sometimes more than an hour to go
Hmm.
through security. Um, there's really like two public entrances that are left, and I think we need to take a look at that, because whether it's like I was looking at swearing in day, state of the state address, or days when there's just big hearings or
Hmm.
big gatherings in the State House, which there are pretty routinely. The way that the building is designed, and remember that it's a couple hundred years old, doesn't facilitate the kind of activities that take place today. And that's something that we want to be accommodating, because at the end of
Hmm.
the day, while right now it's not super accessible to the public because of COVID, it is a public building. And in
Hmm.
Massachusetts, it's actually a public park, a historic park, which is why when you go in, the security is performed by DCR park rangers. So it is something I think that's important to make sure that, one, the building's safe, but two, that it's readily and easily accessible. And I think those are going to be priorities that we look at as we sort of reopen the building coming out of COVID.
Yeah. And I think I've taken it for granted that it's a public building with public access kind of prior to COVID
Mm.
and coming out of COVID. I've had constituents come and schedule um tours and be
Mm.
like, oh, can we come back after we have lunch? And I'm like,
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah. You're like, what? And they were like, well, we thought we had to have like a scheduled tour and only so many people were allowed into the building. It's like, no,
yeah,
this is the people's house, right? Like
yeah.
you're
No,
allowed to come.
right. And I think that's the thing too. When anyone who's gone and sort of toured any federal buildings, right? You need to set it up like months in advance. If you want to
Mhm.
get into the White House, it's like a year in advance. You have to schedule that tour. Um, Pretty much, with few exceptions, during normal business hours, if you show up at the door of the State House, you'll be let in. You have to go through a metal detector and all that, but you'll be let in, and you can sort of go around as as much as you like. And I mean, I think one of the interesting things about our state house, where it is so old, that it's kind of like a museum unto itself. And you can walk around and you can see, the artwork, the sculptures, the murals, the flags, going back to revolutionary times. I always, when I'm giving tours to constituents, I always stop at the stained glass window
Mm-hmm.
that's from colonial times that references King George in
Mm-hmm.
the stained glass window. So that is something that's really special, that we have that really amount of history, in our Capitol building. And it's something that, again, people should experience, and they should know that they can really at any time.
The library is one of my favorite places to
Mm,
be. It's just beautiful. Yeah, being able to show folks around and give kind of the quirky histories of
mm.
kind of the role the state house has played in Massachusetts history. Yeah, it's definitely one of my favorite things, and I'm looking forward to. I've only been to the state house probably a handful of times since
Yeah,
COVID began to pick up our mail
yeah, me
and pick
too.
up pick up other
Yeah,
people's mail, and just kind of check in our office and make sure nothing's going on.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I can't wait till we can get back. So we've got a few more minutes, and I'm wondering kind of what are you working on in terms of legislation? There's so many bills that are filed. I know you have some around the breweries in Gardner. You've also been working on credit union legislation that I've
Yeah.
supported in the past.
Yeah, so the big credit union bill that I'm working on is around municipal deposits. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of rules about municipal finances, and specifically where municipalities can put their money.
Hmm.
Municipalities are like any business or any of us. There's money that comes in and out, and sometimes there's more money, sometimes there's less.
Hmm.
And while they're holding on to that money, it doesn't sit in cash in City Hall. It sits in a bank account.
Hmm.
And sometimes those can be quite a lot. I mean, sometimes we're talking about millions of dollars.
Hmm.
And at that sort of volume, fractions of a percent of interest can really make a huge difference. And that's really where my bill comes from. So my bill um, would allow municipalities to put money and have accounts with credit unions. Currently, it's sort of a gray area whether or not they can. And there's sort of different parts of municipal finance law that are, I don't want to say in conflict, but just not completely in line. And my bill would make it clear that they can. And why I think that's important is that, like many of us who use credit unions for all or part of
Hmm.
our personal financial things, we do so because you tend to get better rates. And a city like Gardner or Leominster, if you could get a quarter of a percent better,
Hmm.
on your municipal accounts, that could translate to tens of thousands of dollars a year of,
Hmm.
of free money. And I certainly think that um, municipalities should have that option. I think there's I think there's a very clear demonstrable benefit to municipalities to have that option. And I also don't think that there's any downside to it.
Hmm.
Over the years, if you look at the sort of history of this statute, as different types of financial institutions have been invented over the last 150 years,
Hmm.
they've been added to the statute. And credit unions, which are sort of the newest of our financial institutions,
Sure.
have not yet been added. And I think that credit unions aren't. We don't have to worry about them being a fad. We don't have to worry about them going under. They're perfectly stable, well run, well regulated. Financial institutions. In fact, I mean they're regulated just the same about as other institutions.
Hmm.
Their insurance requirements are the same. Um, so there's not really any hazard to doing it, and I do see the benefit for municipalities. So that is one of the things that we've been working on that we'll be prioritizing again this session.
Fantastic. That's great. And I love local beer. And
Mm,
Gardner has a better local beer scene than Leominster. It's
yeah,
one of the things that I'm hoping we can step up our game. But there are some kind of like again weird
yeah,
old rules around how breweries can exist because these micro pubs and these microbreweries
right.
are new.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that I mean, Massachusetts is a bevy of old laws because we're one of the oldest states
Hmm.
um, with one of the oldest constitutions. So we have a lot of old laws. And a lot of our systems are designed, our sort of legal structures are designed a very long time ago, especially with alcohol. Um, the entire alcohol industry coming out of Prohibition was basically reinvented.
Hmm.
And that's the system that we're still largely playing with. And one of the things that I've set a lot of effort into is reforming it to reflect the way that consumers operate, the way that the businesses operate, and in a way that I think would be beneficial for our communities. And we've sort of been able to nibble around the edges of
Hmm.
liquor law reform over the years, but the one that you're specifically talking about is about pub brewers, and we we classify breweries in a number of different ways depending on what they're operating as and really what kind of volume they're doing. And pub brewers are sort of they're the little guys.
Hmm.
It's pub brewers, and then what we call farmer brewers are sort of the two at the very end of the trough. They're the really sort of micro brews, and and I mean, I guess sort of everybody starts it as a microbrewer, and some of them
Hmm.
grow up and become big commercial breweries,
Hmm.
like Wachusett,
Wachusett. Hmm.
and so many others. But the really issue that we're trying to fix here is that the way their products are distributed. Every brewer, whether they're farmer, commercial, has the option to either self-distribute, meaning they can buy a truck, put things on that truck, and deliver it, or they can contract with a distributor to put it on their truck and distribute it. The issue that becomes by not allowing pub brewers, and they're the only brewers that can't do this, they don't have the option to self-distribute, is that it creates a lot of logistical hurdles for both them and their distributor because they're not producing a whole lot of product,
Hmm.
and they don't have um, they don't have the capacity to be shipping around the state. So you don't get the economy of scale that you do with something like a Wachusett, right? And or I mean, think about all of the craft beer we have now in Massachusetts, right? Sort of like at the high end of that spectrum is like Sam Adams, right? That is much bigger than like Wachusett, but still much smaller than Miller
Hmm.
or Miller Coors or
Hmm.
Anheuser Busch. So it's like there's this whole now range of products that
Hmm.
that certainly didn't exist 100 years ago when Prohibition ended.
Hmm.
It really didn't even exist 20 years ago.
Right.
But our laws are still the same as they were 100 years ago. And why I've sort of focused on this issue, one, it's a matter of fairness. I think that if you're going to allow certain brewers to have the option of self-distributing, they all should. And I don't think pub brewers should be left out of that.
Hmm.
Plus, I think it's a really viable economic development tool to let businesses sort of try things out. And I mean, I think that the Gardner Ale House, which we have in downtown, is a pub brewery, and I think it's really um, certainly for that end of downtown Gardner has really transformed it. They
Hmm.
bring a lot of life to the downtown, a lot of big events. I mean, they bring they'll have in pre-COVID times, would have an event and bring thousands of people to downtown Gardner in an afternoon, and I think that's something that is really only possible if we allow them a playing field in which
Absolutely.
they can be successful. And this is, I think, such a critical component to it. The fairness piece, the economic viability it
Hmm.
offers them. And again, I don't really think I don't think there's any downside
Hmm.
because we're letting other people do it. It can
Right.
be done, it can be done safely. It can be done in a well-regulated way. And I think it will give, it'll give those businesses tools. And then the carryover benefit to that is the communities that are hosting places like that
Hmm.
can can work them into the sort of economic development fabric that I think works very well in a certainly in a downtown setting. But there's been other success stories all over the state. I think right now we have about at last check there was about 30 pub brewers in Massachusetts, which again I think highlights um, how small
Hmm.
of an issue this is, in terms of
Right.
we're not really trying to tip the table over per se. It is sort of a niche thing.
Yeah,
but I think it's important for those businesses and the communities that they operate in.
absolutely. Well, I'm really excited to follow these bills as they make their way through this legislative session. Rep. Zlotnik, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me
Great to
and
be
talk.
back.
And looking forward to hopefully very soon that we're going to be able to be back in person working together.
Yeah.
So we will see you in June. But thanks for tuning in. Take care, everyone.